Welcome to Rock Center Shorts. I'm Kristen Savell, Managing Director of the Rock Center for Corporate Governance at Stanford. I am very excited to welcome today's guest. Jessi Brooks is Chief Compliance Officer and Associate Regulatory Counsel at Ribbit Capital. Jessi graduated from Stanford Law School and went on to clerk for the Honorable Richard C. Borg in the Northern District of California before joining Bingham McCutcheon. Jessi then transitioned to the Department of Justice, where she worked first as Senior Assistant United States Attorney in the Sex Offense and Domestic Violence section, and later in the National Security section. It was in this role that Jessi took part in several illicit financing cases focused on terrorism and in the investigation of the 2016 hack of crypto exchange Bitfinex, which is where we are going to focus much of our attention today. Welcome, Jessi.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I love being back at Stanford, at least remotely.
Yeah, right. On a computer screen.
Right.
All right, well, let's talk about the Bitfinex hack, because this is a pretty crazy story that plays out kind of like a movie. And you may know this, but I actually just found out that a documentary series about the hack is already being made. So can you give us some background on the hack and explain what was stolen and what, if anything, we know about how it was stolen?
Well, this was definitely a really fascinating case. And I've prosecuted many cases at my time at the DOJ, many of them involving crypto and the involvement of crypto in illicit finance. And throughout my time prosecuting these different cases, I've seen criminals develop their skills as well as the government develop its skills as well. And so among the many things that were interesting about this case, as a prosecutor, it was fascinating to sort of see all the tactics that the defendants were using in the midst of their laundering. And these tactics were very complex and complicated, particularly compared to a lot of the earlier cases that we had prosecuted. But simultaneously, as I said, law enforcement had been learning new skills and new ways to track money on the blockchain. And so this case, more than anything, displayed the unique abilities of blockchain analytics tools and how the power of that can be used and implemented when they're combined with traditional law enforcement techniques. And I think its best way to understand that is to sort of talk a little bit about the case and some of the techniques that were used. So just to give a broad overview of background. So in 2016, a centralized crypto exchange called Bitfinex was hacked. How it was hacked is a little bit still, not public and unclear. However, what we do know is that about 2,000, a little bit more than that, transactions took about $70 million-ish of crypto from the exchange. And it sent it to one unhosted wallet, meaning that wallet was not at a centralized exchange. And it all just sort of sat in that wallet for a few years. And then oddly, in 2019, transactions started to take the crypto out of that wallet, the unhosted wallet. And, at the time that the money was stolen, it was about 70 million-ish, but the price of Bitcoin has obviously fluctuated as well, the price of other cryptocurrencies. So it was growing to hundreds of millions and then billions. At the end, it was a few $1 billion. So portions of the money in that unhosted wallet began to sort of trickle in different ways using somewhat traditional laundering techniques, but in a cyber-focused, intensive way to take that money to a variety of different platforms. And in the midst of tracking how that money moved, we were able to begin tying it to these two individuals, the married couple who are the defendants in this case. And they use just a whole array of tactics that an investigator that only knows about blockchain analytics tools might not have been able to track it. And an investigator who only knows about money laundering, not in crypto, would not have been able to. But using the skills of combining those two really showed the power of these tools. So just to give you a sense of some of the tactics that they use, and this is definitely not comprehensive, but they set up multiple accounts that were under fictitious entities. And some of those fictitious entities were actually real shell companies that were tied to relatives of theirs or them themselves. And then they began to move stolen funds in a series of small amounts, which is pretty typical for money laundering. But they're also able to automate a lot of those transactions. So it seems almost haphazard, But the way that some of these computer programs that are used for this work is that they just send money in a haphazard way. So it's a lot more difficult to track. And then they started layering a lot of the stolen funds by depositing them in centralized exchanges, passing it through the dark market. So you might not be able to track it in the same way. And then converting the Bitcoin to different forms of virtual currency in something that is called chain hopping. So there's a variety of these tactics, and we, the law enforcement team is tracking this because we see the money moving in 2019, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason except for the fact that it's all coming back to these two individuals. And these two individuals, like their social media kept on giving as well. And I think a lot of people who have followed this even remotely in the news, there's been a lot of attention to it because a lot of what their social media was doing was helping build the case against them as well. So we're seeing the money go to virtual currency exchanges and accounts that are tied to them. We're seeing it go through dark markets to get gift cards that are tied to these defendants. And then simultaneously, we're seeing on their social media that they're spending money. And all of those tactics together are starting to build this case till eventually we're able to secure, based on probable cause, a warrant to search some of the devices associated with these individuals. And that's sort of when the evidence just continued to pile up. And we found a lot there, but I think the big news point is like that last piece of evidence that we found that really just like showed overwhelmingly that these individuals had been laundering the funds. And I'm happy to talk about that, but I'll allow you to sort of ask the question in the midst of it.
No, that's great. Tell us about that last piece of evidence.
Sure. So as I said, when I was explaining the beginning of the hack, there was these 2,000 plus transactions that go to this one unhosted wallet. And for those who aren't crypto aficionados, when there's a hosted wallet, it means that it's at an exchange. And when that's the case, if the exchange is cooperative with law enforcement, or there's some sort of history or relationship where, they'll comply with subpoenas, or they have US customers, so they have to comply with US subpoenas, or we use like an MLAT or some sort of international process. But regardless, when there's a centralized entity that you can send a subpoena to, you can get information about the account holder. But for unhosted wallets, you can't do that. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do anything to stop illicit activity in unhosted wallets. And in fact, like there's a lot more techniques than there were even when we were investigating this case. But you can't just send a subpoena to the unhosted wallet and say, hey, tell me more about yourself, because obviously that's not going to work and you don't know who to send it to. But you can find out a lot about the unhosted wallet by who they send their money to, but you still can't crack it. You can't crack that unhosted wallet. But through these devices, we were able to find in an encrypted area of the devices all the keys associated with that unhosted wallet. So in an unhosted wallet, they might have thousands of addresses that hold different amounts of money that can be transacted to and from that are all held in that one wallet. And you can't crack it without a private key, as I'm sure a lot of people who even dabble slightly in crypto understand. But the defendants had stored on their devices in an encrypted manner the private keys associated with their unhosted wallet, because just like the rest of us, they're humans and their memories are not infallible and they can't keep that all in their heads. They need to store it somewhere. And so all those private keys were able to show that these defendants were the ones who controlled that unhosted wallet, and also allowed the government and our team to seize the funds associated with it, because we were able to get a warrant that allowed us to move it to a government hosted wallet. And from there, like the evidence just continued to pile on to the point that there was more than probable cause to arrest them, in my opinion.
That's so fascinating. So from the perspective of a prosecutor investigating financial crimes, did the fact that you were dealing with crypto assets on the blockchain make this easier or harder to investigate?
It's so funny because this is like the drum I've been beating since I was in the government. I would take, as a prosecutor in my former life, which is still very near and dear to my heart, that I would take a crypto case over a fiat case any day. And you can say and slightly understand that from the fact that when you look at the blockchain, it's obviously largely transparent for most cryptocurrencies. And so there's a lot that you can get from it. And the tools that help you read the information that's on the blockchain are just developing and getting better and better all the time. But it's also like when you're comparing it to traditional financial institutions that have just gotten so big and have these processes where when you subpoena them, you get information back that might be a bazillion spreadsheets, and then you have to go through those and find where the next lead is. With crypto cases and investigations, when you use the tools properly, you sort of start with a head start. And then you can do it all simultaneously because I know that X wallet sent to Y wallet. So then I can go and say, what can I find out about X wallet and what can I find about Y wallet? Rather than you develop a lead, you find out what bank accounts that individual has, then you subpoena those banks and you get the data back, and maybe it takes a while, maybe 10 different spreadsheets appear because they're all sort of formatted differently. And then you sort of have to work like that. And then on top of that, you know, the crypto system and exchanges are obviously, some are in the United States, some are international, some are ones that won't cooperate with us. But largely, they all touch the United States in some way. And so a lot of them want to cooperate with investigations in the United States. And so you're able to get a lot more information from these exchanges than you would with maybe a bank in a country that is not as quick to respond. And I think that part of that is because the crypto ecosystem is somewhat unique from traditional finance in that illicit finance at one exchange can easily affect illicit finance at another exchange, and so on and so on and so on. And I think, and maybe this is the optimist in me, but I think that most people in the crypto ecosystem do not want terrorists and sanctioned individuals heavily using their products, particularly the centralized ones. And so it sort of helps you if you don't have these bad actors there as a centralized exchange. So they're more likely to cooperate. And, you know, you don't need to fill in every single little piece to sort of show what's happened with a crypto transaction like you might have to with fiat currency.
Okay. You mentioned that a couple was arrested in connection with the hack. It's my understanding that they've been charged with conspiracy to launder money and conspiracy to defraud the United States, but they haven't been charged with conducting the actual hack. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a question that I think has been circulating a lot, and there's been a lot of speculation. And what I can say is I was not there for the charging decisions, but I have a better understanding than probably most people that are not in the space of how charging decisions are made. And if you look at the details of the complaint, which for anyone who's interested about this case, it's worth reading because it's fascinating and it's written in a way that's trying to be consumable for as many people that might not understand crypto. The evidence against them is not associated with the hack. The evidence is associated with the laundering subsequently. And I went through some of the tactics that they used, and everyone can sort of speculate about the fact that if they were able to control at least a huge portion of the billions of dollars, what that means and how they got it. And like, it would all just purely be speculation. But what I can say is it doesn't really matter. There's enough evidence to show that they're knowingly laundering funds that are criminal in nature and have been stolen. So although a lot of people want that last little piece to be like connected and figure that out, what the evidence is associated with who controlled that unhosted wallet that received all the money, and then what happened with it afterwards and how did it end up tied to the two individuals who were arrested.
Right. Okay. So we've been focusing a lot on security, which is an important part of the crypto regulatory landscape. But I want to broaden our lens and ask you about crypto regulation more generally, particularly because you are in a unique position of having prosecuted crypto crimes while at the DOJ and now working for a VC firm that invests pretty heavily in crypto. Do you think regulation is a good idea? And what form would you like that regulation to take?
Yeah, not only does our VC invest heavily in crypto, but it also invests heavily in regulatory relationships and trying to shape that out. And there's a reason for that. Like, just to take a step back, I loved my time at the Department of Justice, and I think that government service is really important. But throughout my cases involving crypto, and I'm not the only one from the team either, I realized how powerful this technology is and how much it can help people. And I could go on and on about that for a while, and maybe that's for a different discussion, but there is so much potential here. But I really believe that I want to be a part of building the regulatory scheme and the compliance side of crypto and blockchain, so to make it safe for people, accessible for everybody, not just the people that like have the time to sort of sit and play around in decentralized finance or can afford an entire Ethereum, but rather for the individuals who are unbanked or, don't have identification that's readily available. And so they need to find a different way to store their money. There's just endless possibilities here, not to mention the power of the blockchain. So to get closer to your question, regulation is essential, and thoughtful regulation is even more essential. Now, what does that mean? I think people in the space are still figuring it out. And obviously there's some people in the space that believe in regulation and some that don't, just like every platform. But it's not going to be an easy answer. Like if we could snap our fingers and come up with a whole new regulatory scheme that everyone would comply with, Congress would pass, regulators would agree on, that would be amazing. But that's not exactly how things work. Rather, it's like a lot of just education. We spent a lot of time educating and collaborating with different entities in the space and regulators, all the branches, just to make sure that they sort of understand what the technology is. And from my perspective, I really take it as a badge of honor to be able to go into these rooms and explain how powerful blockchain analytics tools are and how they can accomplish things for law enforcement and for investigations for the prevention of illicit finance that no other tool has been able to do in my experience. And, I spent about a decade at the DOJ, so I've seen a lot of different tools, and it's really exciting. And so what the form of regulation will look like, I would just be speculating and giving my own opinion. But what I can say is that you can't treat crypto blockchain ecosystem exactly like traditional finance. Yes, there is overlap, but there are unique attributes of crypto and blockchain. The first thing being transparency, that should be used and leveraged in order to help with regulation. Now, like just for an example, it's really important that we KYC individuals and that we prevent sanctioned individuals. And traditionally in fiat finance and traditional rails, that means ensuring that institutions collect a lot of private information, and then maybe they send SARS out if they're in the United States or something like that. And so there's this risk assessment associated with who is this person, are they not sanctioned, et cetera. And all those things are essential for sure. But what the blockchain allows for is like a totally new way to KYC, which is know your customer, these individuals. And so there's so many things happening in this space, and like people way smarter and more technical than I am are working on them. I mean, you can embed your KYC into an unhosted wallet, so you don't have to share that information. And then you use these things called zero knowledge proof to prove that you've done your KYC, but without providing that information. And so not only does that comply with, in theory, when it's fully developed, not only does it comply with what the FATF wants and what Treasury wants, and even what the DOJ would want, but it also enhances the existing KYC system because it allows for you to have more privacy with your information and security with your information. Like how many of us either have been or know someone that has been fraudulently had their identity stolen or their information taken because you get an email from your bank or from your employer saying like, we were hacked, I'm sorry, like who knows who has your social security number, and then you just cross your fingers. But what if there was a system where you could have that same security that you're not transacting with a sanctioned individual or a terrorist, and instead you get to hold all your information yourself. And that's just like such a powerful thing about this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to end by putting you in the hot seat a little. It's not at all clear who should regulate crypto assets, with some favoring the SEC, some favoring the CFTC, some advocating for an entirely new regulator. Do you have a position on this?
I do. In a dream world, everyone in the crypto DeFi ecosystem would agree on this, but that's never going to happen in any world. And obviously, every time we have a new technology, we can't be creating a new regulator. I just feel very strongly about that. But I also feel like there's no way to name one person or entity or agency to regulate the entire space. We don't do that for financial institutions. We don't do that for almost anything. I mean, you look at my crypto investigations, we worked with DOJ, we worked with HSI, we worked with NSA and CIA and, the FBI. Like it's an all hands on deck approach. And that's why I think Biden's executive order is actually a really interesting perspective to take on it, and something that the crypto space, I think, generally has been looking at in a positive manner, because if we really want to tackle this and make it both regulated but also useful, we need every agency to have their hands in it. And I think what the CFTC has been doing has been increasingly interesting. I think if you look at Treasury, they have been really forward looking on how to handle this in a new, unique way. But regardless, every agency that is involved in both the executive order and may be involved in regulation needs to talk to the private sector and collaborate with them, because there is no way that individuals that have to be generalists and know about crypto, but also know about 10 other things and are like constantly have risk and fear on their brain, like most regulators should, can possibly know, like, for example, all the KYC tools out there or all the amazing innovation that's happening that we have to, make sure that we're fostering in this country and abroad.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jessi. It was great speaking with you.
Of course. Thank you all so much.
Bye.